A reader asked me what's different about animation spec. I got a little help from this from my friend Laura Harcum, who used to do development for Warner Brothers. She worked on Iron Giant, and she created and executive produced and wrote the show Lost Room for the Sci-Fi Channel. And she said the first thing to think about is making sure that your story imperatively has to be in animation, that it can't be done in some other form. And she also said to make sure that you're not dumbing it down for the kids. You don't want to pan it for the kids. In fact, she says the demographic is from age 2 to 92. So whether that's like literally or figuratively, it's just something to think about. Also, the script might be a little bit shorter because, you know, these are really expensive to make, so it might land around 90 pages. And then finally, I want to remind you about theme. All these great animation movies, part of their appeal is they're really strong themes. They're family friendly, but they're also psychologically kind of like complex and true. I've written a highly contained spec script. Now what can I do with it? I would say try Virtual Pitch Fest. Try some of these query services, because if you have a great pitch and you say it takes place in a coffin or an elevator, immediately a bunch of people who can't afford to make, you know, $100 million blockbusters, you know, maybe only 50 people can make $100 million blockbusters. But there's 3,000 or 4,000 people, me included, who could make a $250,000 movie, or who could make a $25,000 movie. So if it's really good and the concept's cool, get it out there. People will want to read it. And if it's really well done and it is, you know, controllable budget-wise, it's going to open doors. How do I know if I had a killer ending? Well, the killer ending is the unification of the goal and the need into one succinct action. Meaning the character can't get the goal that he wants. He can't get the girl. He can't stop the bad guy until he has that character arc, until he has that growth. The reward for changing and, you know, and loving and being lovable in a way is that you get the girl, you get the boy, and it's like that's the whole point. He can't get it at the beginning of the movie, right? Or the movie would be over. So like in LA Confidential, he wants to get the bad guy, but he's super ego. He won't shoot someone in the back. That instant when he changes and gets his hands dirty, shoots him in the back, he's changed, he's grown, right? The need has been taken care of, but also the goal. And that's the only moment where it all comes together. And in that 1/24th of a second, the goal and the need unify, and that's your killer ending. I've read that action scripts are supposed to have explosions every set number of pages, but this kind of rules are kind of constricting for me. What can I do? Action scenes don't mean you're limited. Action scenes are a challenge. Write a great action scene. Look at the Bourne Identity. He uses, you know, the stair post. He uses a body when he falls down the steps. I show a scene or talk about a scene in my DVD set from Lord of the Rings where like there's 30 or 40 little elements in the scene that Legolas is using when he beats the elephant creatures. So think about in terms of being clever and writing your little set piece scene that shows off your voice. Go get 5 movies that are great, that are recent in that genre, that have been successful, and, you know, do a little sequence breakdown or do a breakdown of like where the action is. Basically, look, if that's what's going on, if that's the expectation, there's no reason to buck that rule. But here's the thing. You also have to get out of this idea that an action scene is awful, or an action scene is boring, or an action scene can't have character. Character can also be expressed and manifest in your action scenes. Think about the opening Casino Royale. You know, M later calls him a blunt instrument, but that's there in every moment in the opening. The parkour runner runs and does stuff really smoothly. He does things kind of like aggressively and kind of like clumsily, because that's the origin story of James Bond before he became, you know, shaken, not stirred. So the other thing is, figure out how to put character into action scenes. There shouldn't be a problem that you have to do action scenes. The problem or the challenge is doing them really well. Do you believe in the sequence method or the mini-movie method? The concept of sequences in terms of reels have been something editors have been using for like 100 years, like since the early, you know, silent cinema. So I don't know exactly, you know, how many mini-movie method chunks there are or how many sequences there are in Paul Gleno's method, but I've found that there's usually 11 to 12, like 7, 8, 9-minute sequences in most of Hollywood movies I've taken a look at, right? So, but here's the principle. The principle is this. You need to have crisp, sharp turns in your story. And they need to be qualitative changes, not just like, well, the cop is investigating people and now he's interrogating more people with more intensity. No, you have to find like some really surprising twist. I talk about the Chipotle method where it's like once you go on from here to there, you never go back. Like once you select a burrito and chicken, you never go back. You're always going forward. It's the same thing with sequences. Like the level of conflict that happens in sequence 4, sequence 5 must escalate it, and you never kind of go back and repeat the similar material. A lot of times you can find your sequences or test your sequences by just asking yourself this: what would my character do next? Now that he or she had gotten this new information, what would he or she do next? Someone asked me whether or not it was their job to write out the climax and really explicitly explain the turning point in a scene. Well, guess what? The turning points in scenes are sometimes the turning points in sequences. And that's where the story changes, so you want to know what happens next, but it's also where the character changes, or we learn something about him. We realize, oh, that gets under his skin, or that really, makes him really mad and makes him want to, get revenge. But there are your 10 or 20 chances to explore exactly who the character is. So you're going to throw those away and leave them to chance? No, that's your responsibility. Are scripts that are over 90 to 100 pages less likely to be read? Let's put it this way. If there is a number at which, developing execs kind of groan about a script length, I'm going to say it's more like 106 to 108 pages. Back in the day when everything was like, in print, they would do the flip, they would look at the page count. But one of the things they would do, more importantly than looking at the page count, is they would look at how much black stuff is on the page, like the density of kind of the type. And if it was all like blocks and blocks and blocks of text, they would think to themselves, oh my God, this is going to be impossible to read. So that's one thing. Now, first of all, I don't think you need to obsess over this. I talk about story density. If your story, for how many pages you're using, is amazing, and it's twisting and it's turning, and you take up this much space, instead of this much space, but in this space you have 3 or 4 more jokes, I think it's fine. So I'd more worry about your story density, making sure that your story needs all the pages it needs. Here's a little hint. You can cut out 2, 3, 4 pages by just dealing with your widows, the 1 or 2 words that are at the end of a line, and like tightening your sentence structure. And then if you look for some ellipses or transitions where a scene can end a little bit, more on a question mark, or there can be kind of a gap that's kind of interesting, so you cut out like half a page here or there, that's another 2 or 3, 4 pages. And then ultimately, if you spend some time, really carefully getting at the core of your story, maybe changing the perspective of a scene, like instead of showing the minor characters doing it, just show the major character listening to them, you almost always can cut out 6, 7, 8, 10 pages from your script. Hey, thanks a lot for listening. If you like what I'm saying, it's resonating with you, go into alystscreenwriting.com and check out my new DVD set, Complete Screenwriting from A to Z to A-List. I think you'll really enjoy it.